If France knew colonialism could be so easy, profitable, protected and praised, it would have never bothered sending troops, building forts, or pretending to civilize. It would have done what it's doing now, break the rules, call it partnership, and rake in the profits. What worries isn't just how massive this scam is, it's that France still wants a standing ovation for pulling it off. I had this line from the French president, Emmanuel Macron, about how France deserves more gratitude from African countries. Gratitude for neocolonialism. This came after Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger kicked France out, and I wanted to know, what exactly does France think it's owed thanks for? So I dug in. What I found wasn't just a misunderstanding or a failed mission. It's a well-documented daylight robbery, out in the open, and worst of all, it's still happening. France promised development, security and stability, but years later, over half of the Sahelian population still lives below the poverty line. A mission in Mali that was supposed to stabilize the region dragged on for nearly a decade. Insecurity spread, economies froze, and people got poorer. And to top it off, they're still using a currency France designed for its colonies. What kind of partnership is that? So no, it's no surprise that people said enough. France didn't get applause, it got the boot, a slap in the face, and honestly, it was long overdue. Let's rewind, because it helps to know a brief history of France's activity in Africa. After independence in the 1960s, France didn't leave, it just got smarter. No more direct rule, now it's military bases and economic chokeholds. A new look, same leash. France maintained a tight military footprint throughout its former colonies in Africa: Mali, Chad, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Gabon, you name it. They kept boots on the ground, rolling in with tanks whenever trouble brewed. They called it peacekeeping. Operation names were flashy: Epavia, the Cod, Bison, and the more recent Serval Barkhane. France sent forces to defend Chad's government against Libyan-backed rebels in Operation Bison from 1969 to 1972. This was at the request of Francois Tombalbaye, the first president of Chad. His rule was marked by authoritarianism and corruption, leading to widespread rebellion. In 1986, French reinforcements were flown to Togo after a coup attempt. The coup collapsed, and President Eyadema, another dictator and French client, remained in power. In 1996, French troops intervened twice in the Central African Republic to stabilize mutinies. In the 1980s, France intervened in Chad by providing military support, specifically to President Hissène Habre during the Toyota War against Libya. Hissène Habre's regime committed grave human rights abuses against his people, including rapes, torture, and the killing of thousands by his secret police. These are just a few examples. The playbook was to land troops, prop up friendly leaders, and sell it as peacekeeping. Even the humanitarian missions were power plays with press coverage. France played global sheriff, with no badge, no questions asked, and with a few tongue-along allies. So it's no surprise that their recent intervention in the Sahelian region is similar, driven by self-interest, greed, and the pursuit of power. In 2013, Mali asked France for help. Jihadists were storming in from the north. France responded with Operation Serval. President Hollande said the operation would continue for as long as necessary, meaning France would remain for the time required to safeguard its interests. In Macron's 2017 Ouagadougou speech, France pledged a partnership approach, combining defense, diplomacy, and development, vowing to support economic projects alongside military help. But what happened? Operation Serval morphed into Operation Barkhane, a regional war machine. It expanded to cover 5 Sahelian nations. By 2021, France had over 5,000 troops in the Sahel. Barkhane's cost reached 695 million euros in 2019 and closer to €1 billion in 2020. French aid was nowhere near that. In 2018, the 5 Sahel states received only 10% of French aid to Africa, with Mali, despite being the main focus of intervention, getting just 2.5%. Aid to the region was limited and spread thin. There was a clear gap between France's stated political goals, like supporting stability and development in Mali, and how France distributed its money. How did this help? Well, security. Jihadist violence exploded. There was a 5-fold increase in deaths in both Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, with more than 4,000 deaths in 2019 compared to 770 in 2016. In Burkina Faso, the number of fatalities increased to 1,800 in 2019 from 8 in 2016. The displacement crisis was just as bad, as it increased tenfold to 500,000, and tens of thousands became refugees. There were 2,005 attacks in the Sahel region, with an estimated 4,839 fatalities in 2021. As of the period between 2021 and 2022, the Sahel's poverty rate was 76.1%. So, what was France doing there? I mean, whatever it wasn't working. At the beginning of Operation Serval, there was some success. The jihadist advance was stopped, but as the years dragged on, the situation got worse. Was the French capacity to help deal with the security situation no longer there? Let's be honest, this wasn't about peace, it was about profit, minerals. French companies dominate many African industries on highly favorable terms. Between 2013 and 2022, France maintained a substantial economic presence across the Sahel. Major French firms, both state-owned and private, operated there in key sectors. French troops were not guarding people, they were guarding pipelines, mines, and balance sheets. These companies do offer jobs and services, but under what terms? The profits go north, but the poverty stays south. Take Orano, the French nuclear energy giant. They have been mining uranium in Niger since the 1970s. That uranium powers nearly 20% of France's electricity. Niger only gets a measly 5.5% royalty. In a health crisis, uranium mining in elite narco-con regions has been associated with health risks due to exposure to radioactive materials like radon gas. Its long-term exposure is linked to lung cancer. Mining also releases dust and contaminates groundwater. The overuse of water for mining, estimated at 270 billion liters over 40 years, has strained scarce water resources. The water is extracted from underground aquifers in one of the world's driest areas, depleting scarce groundwater reserves. Then there's Total Energies. It operates fuel stations, pipelines, oil blocks from Mauritania to Chad. In some countries like Burkina Faso, they've had the fuel market on lock, monopoly level control. Vinci, the construction giant, scored massive road, airport and dam contracts. And guess what? They're often funded by French aid. France gives aid, then its own companies get paid. That's not generosity, that's a carousel. Orange Telecom has a huge footprint in the region and millions of users. West African revenues are in the billions, with barely any local ownership. The French military in the region is there to protect one thing only: these economic interests. Facilitate business, siphoning of resources and profits. The insecurity warranted France's intervention because it was not good for business. Once they came, they would give the bare minimum, and the rest they didn't seem to care much about. Other than the military, the French have another tool in their arsenal. All this, the troops, the contracts, the control, it runs on a currency that should have died with colonialism in the 60s, the CFA franc. Independent countries can control their own money, can print it freely, can't devalue it. They've outsourced their monetary policy to a former colonial power. And it's not just about the money, it's about control. The CFA makes it easy for French companies to operate. Their money is protected, their profits are easily convertible, their dominance is built into the financial system. It's colonial control through central banking. So how did this monetary control begin? The CFA franc was born on December 26, 1945, establishing a new currency for French African colonies. The currency was created to stabilize colonial economies disrupted by the Second World War, ensuring France's economic control by pegging it to the French franc. Following independence in the 1960s, most former French colonies retained the CFA franc. 14 African countries use it. It's now pegged to the euro because France uses it as a member of the European Union. Does this make it better? Not when half your reserves sit in someone else's vault. These countries must deposit 50% of their foreign reserves into the French treasury, into what they call an operations account. Previously, it was 100% until 1973, then 65% until 2005. These deposits generate interest for France while limiting African control over their funds. The use of this monetary system has created two distinct monetary unions: the West African Economic and Monetary Union and the Central African Economic and Monetary Community. Each monetary union has its own central bank and financial regulations, while the central banks of different monetary zones issue orders for banknotes and coins. The production happens in France. France also appoints representatives to the central bank's boards, granting it veto power over key decisions. This influence allows France to align CFA's own policies with its economic interests, such as maintaining a strong euro peg that benefits French companies operating in the region. This direct presence allows France to influence monetary policy decisions, credit allocation, and other financial regulations. There is a benefit to the CFA franc being pegged to the euro at a fixed rate, currency stability, and controlling inflation. However, the convertibility facilitates trade and investment for French corporations, which dominate in the CFA's own countries. The free capital mobility ensures French firms can repatriate profits easily back to France, so it's France that mainly benefits. While the CFA franc maintains low inflation, countries like Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria, which left the franc zone post-independence, have outperformed CFA's own economies in GDP growth. The fixed peg makes CFA's own exports less competitive, contributing to high unemployment and poverty. This is because countries cannot devalue their currency to boost exports or adjust interest rates to address local economic conditions. West African leaders have tried to break free. They launched the ECO, a new currency. It was supposed to debut in 2020 and end all the exploitation based on the CFA franc. However, it has been delayed due to economic challenges and coordination issues with the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. Whether this new currency will be established and whether it can bring about the change that is needed in this region, time will tell. Monetary freedom means political freedom, and I don't think France will let go without a fight. But they don't have a choice. Public perceptions have turned sharply negative. By 2022, local resentment toward France had boiled over across the Sahel. Popular protests in Burkina Faso and Mali repeatedly targeted symbols of French influence. Demonstrators burned French flags and effigies and launched online campaigns calling for the repatriation of French troops. Burkina Faso set to sanction French NGOs and signaled interest in nationalizing key sectors. Niger's post-2021 authorities announced reviews of all foreign contracts. By mid-2023, they had halted Iran's uranium projects and demanded renegotiation. In 2022, the Malian junta government expelled dozens of French NGOs and suspended mining licenses granted to foreigners. Authorities promised to negotiate gold mining contracts. France has been forced to scale back. Mali and Burkina Faso withdrew permission for French troops in 2022. Niger's 2023 coup likewise expelled French forces. French forces have begun handing over or closing bases. In 2024, Senegal's new government ordered all foreign bases closed. In early 2025, France has also turned over its Abidjan Marine base in Côte d'Ivoire. So let's go back to that question. Why did these countries say thank you? Because what France offered wasn't help. It was a power play in a pity package. Rest up in development, but driven by control. Promised as a partnership, but delivered as profit. The French military didn't protect peace. It protected pipelines. French aid didn't build futures. It funded contracts for French companies. The CFA franc didn't stabilize economies. It sterilized them. The Sahel didn't reject friendship. They rejected servitude. And they should not apologize. Not one bit.